Missing person cases can be solved in a multitude of ways, whether that's down to new forensic investigative techniques or good old-fashioned police work. Some missing person cases take strange twists and turns and have the most unexpected endings. Number 5. When 46-year-old Craig Williamson and 41-year-old Christine Reinhardt met in 1990, it was love at first sight. After a month of knowing each other, the two got married at Lake Tahoe and began their lives together. The couple were very much in love and very optimistic about the future. The two decided that they wanted to set up a fish farming business together. After gathering together everything they needed, they bought a fish farm near Clintonville, Wisconsin, and started the business. Just 3 short years after their marriage, Craig would mysteriously disappear. Christine searched tirelessly for her husband, and 2 years later, his mysterious missing person case would come to a startling conclusion. August 28, 1993 was an exciting day for the couple. Craig was headed to Colorado Springs to collect some fish for their farm. That morning, Craig hopped into his converted bus turned van, kissed his wife goodbye, and set off for Colorado Springs. There was no indication that anything was amiss, and Christine expected that Craig would be home within a matter of days. Throughout his stay, the two chatted on the phone, and on August 30th, 1993, the couple called each other at around 9 p.m. Craig asked Christine to call him the next morning as a wake-up call of sorts, so he didn't miss his meeting. This was the last time that Christine ever heard from her husband, and when he failed to return home the next day, she knew that something was wrong. Craig was reported missing, and the next day, his cards were found neatly placed on a shelf in a supermarket in El Paso. This clue puzzled investigators, and their search for Craig continued. Just 2 weeks after he'd first been reported missing, his rental car was discovered in Juarez, Mexico. Bizarrely, clippings of his beard hair were found in the car, and forensic scientists determined that they'd been cut using scissors, adding another perplexing clue to the evidence locker of Craig's case. He had left everything behind at the motel in Colorado Springs, and Christine began to wonder whether the concussion Craig had suffered in the weeks before his disappearance may have played a role. Christine told investigators that Craig had a concussion and that she didn't want him to drive to Colorado Springs. However, he was adamant that he would be okay. The tips and leads quickly dried up. That was until a woman came forward claiming to have seen a man fitting Craig's description on a train from Montana to Washington. The sighting was never 100% confirmed, but investigators felt confident that this lead may lead them to Craig. Sadly, this tip turned out to be yet another dead end. Then, in 1994, Christine partnered with the popular TV show Unsolved Mysteries to bring more attention to Craig's case. Incredibly, a year later, Craig contacted Christine after seeing a rerun of the show on TV. He told her that he didn't know he was missing and only realized it when he saw himself on the show. Craig claims that he was attacked in Colorado Springs and that when he woke up, he had a hospital wristband and no memory of his life. He traveled throughout the US picking up odd jobs whenever he could before settling in Key West, Florida. Investigators didn't buy this story though, and believed that he staged his own disappearance to escape the pressure of running the business and the debts that came with it. Craig and Christine did reunite following his reappearance, but decided to get divorced and moved on with their lives. Number 4. Gabriel Nakai was a devoted father and husband living in Newcastle, Australia. Life for the Nakais was going well. However, one day in 1987 would turn their lives upside down, and it wouldn't be until 20 years later that they finally received answers to the missing person case that had been plaguing them for many decades. On January 21st, 1987, Gabriel called his wife, Pam, from work, telling her that he would be home for lunch. Lunchtime came and went, but there was no sign of Gabriel. Pam waited for Gabriel to walk through the door later that evening, but he never did. This was extremely unusual for Gabriel, and the shocking discovery the next morning confirmed Pam's suspicions that something wasn't quite right. On the side of the road, his family found his car, abandoned and burned out, but there was no sign of Gabriel. With the discovery of his car, the outlook was bleak, and Gabriel's family braced themselves for the coming days. But as the searches continued, no trace of him could be found. 2 weeks after he went missing, there was activity on his bank account. He'd withdrawn money to buy camping supplies, but after that, the trail went cold. Years passed, and the pain for Gabriel's family never subsided. Eventually, 20 years after he had vanished, his family filed a motion to have him declared deceased in absence. That's when Senior Constable Georgia Robinson made a startling discovery. As she was sorting through the paperwork for the inquest, she decided to take one last look at medical records, and that's when she saw it. She came across the medical records of a man named Gabriel Nakai, and working on a hunch, she decided to investigate it further. She eventually ended up finding Gabriel and asking him about his life. The more the two spoke, the more memories came flooding back into Gabriel's mind. Gabriel's family were told the good news, and after 20 years, they were finally reunited with their lost loved one. Gabriel survived for the first few years by living in the wilderness and taking odd jobs wherever he could. Then Pastor Barry Hayhoe of the River of Life Church took him in, offering him a job and a place to stay. From here, Gabriel began to get back on his feet, and memories slowly began to trickle to the forefront of his mind. Jennifer, Gabriel's daughter, believes that he suffered from something called dissociative fugue, a type of amnesia that makes people walk away from their normal lives. Number 3. Richard Hoagland of Indianapolis, Indiana had it all: a wonderful life, 2 children, a huge 5-bedroom house, and a luxury speedboat ready to whisk the family away on the weekends. Richard owned an insurance company that allowed him and his family to enjoy the finer things in life, and to the outside world, the Hoaglands were living what many would consider the American dream. However, one day in 1993 turned this view on its head, leaving behind many questions. On February 10, 1993, Richard made a panicked call to his wife, Linda. After this phone call, Linda collected their 2 children from daycare and rushed home. She began calling all of the hospitals in the area looking for her husband, but there was no record of a patient under that name being admitted. Linda was now frantic, searching around the house looking for any indication of what may have been wrong with her husband or where he was headed. She noted that Richard's toothbrush, clothes, and coat were all in the house, which only added to her worry. Hours passed, and without any word from Richard, all Linda could do was wait. After a few days had passed, it was clear to Linda that Richard wasn't coming home, and she contacted the police to ask for their assistance. As the authorities began their search, they discovered Richard's car, abandoned at the Indianapolis International Airport. According to sources, Richard hadn't taken his passport with him when he disappeared, and there were no logs of him flying on the day that he disappeared. So where was Richard Hoagland? The case quickly fell silent, with Linda trying desperately to find her husband. Then, just a few months later, in the summer of 1993, Richard sent a birthday card to his sons. Both cards contained $50, and he left a cryptic note in one of the cards which read, quote, "Maybe sometime soon we will get to see each other. I bet I won't even know you, it's been so long." This was the last known contact from Richard Hoagland. That was until 2016, when a man in Florida began looking into his own ancestry and family tree. The man discovered that his uncle, Terry Szymanski, had passed away in 1991 after being involved in a boating accident. But he also discovered something else. Records indicated that his uncle Terry had gotten married in 1993, even though he had supposedly passed away in 91. This immediately sent alarm bells ringing, and after checking to make sure that it wasn't a clerical error, the nephew contacted their local police department and asked for their assistance. Records indicate that Terry Szymanski had bought a home in Florida and had gotten married 2 years after his death certificate was filed. Richard had rented a room from Terry's father shortly after he disappeared, and that's where he came across the certificate. He then used this to obtain a driving license and other documentation, and then went on to live his life under his new name. Had it not been for Terry's family, Richard Hoagland may have gone undetected forever. Richard was ordered to pay $2 million to his ex-wife, Linda, for missing child support payments, and was sentenced to 2 years in a federal prison for aggravated identity theft. Number 2. 24-year-old Petra Patsicka was a computer science student studying at university in 1984. On the surface, she seemed like any other student, keen to finish their degree and start the next step of their lives. But something inside of Petra was different, and one warm July afternoon, she mysteriously disappeared, never to be seen again, or at least that's what everyone thought. The weekend before Petra disappeared, she spent time at her family home in Wolfsburg, telling her parents that she planned to write some more of her dissertation when she returned days later. According to her family, Petra was excited and there were no signs that anything was wrong. Petra got on the bus back to university, waving goodbye to her family. Little did they know that this would be the last time they would see or hear from Petra. When Petra failed to show up at the family home days later, she was reported missing by her younger brother, who was supposed to be taking care of the home while her parents were out of town. A wide-scale search began, and police began interviewing those closest to Petra. The only clue they have is that in the days before her disappearance, Petra asked a neighbor if he could water her flowers while she was away. But apart from this, leads were few and far between. After some time had passed, authorities began to believe that Petra was no longer alive, and their suspicions were confirmed when an unknown offender confessed to being responsible. This man quickly rescinded his confession, however. In the minds of authorities, they were certain that he was involved, though. Due to a lack of evidence, he was never tried or convicted for Petra's disappearance, and it wouldn't be until 2015 that a major break in the case was made. In 2015, a 55-year-old woman, going by the name of Mrs. Schneider, called the police to her home in Dusseldorf to report a burglary. The police arrived at her apartment, and after talking with her, they asked her to produce official documents and identification. However, the man was unable to. After much prodding, Mrs. Schneider confessed that she was in fact missing 24-year-old Petra Patsicka, who'd mysteriously disappeared in 1984. She told investigators that she'd saved up 4,000 Dutch marks so that she could move away and start a new life. She took odd jobs on the black market wherever she could, and always kept to herself, avoiding contact with neighbors and other people around Dusseldorf. She refused to tell investigators why she disappeared, and denied any attempts made by her family to reunite. Number 1. 24-year-old Denise Bollinger shared a home in Raymond, New Hampshire with her estranged husband, and while the relationship was rocky, it appears that the two still cared for one another. Denise was working as a bookkeeper for a small company in Manchester, New Hampshire, and was looking forward to what the future held for her. On January 17, 1985, Denise's husband, who has not been publicly named, returned home to find an ominous note that read, "We've got your wife." There were footprints in the snow outside of the home, but Denise was nowhere to be found. Denise had used his truck earlier that day to drop him off in Manchester before returning home, as hers was in the process of being repaired. There was no sign of his truck or Denise anywhere, and he quickly called the police to report his estranged wife missing. The police sprang into action and opened an investigation into Denise's mysterious disappearance. Just days after she was last seen, her husband's truck that she'd been driving was found at Logan Airport. Inside the truck lay her social security card, birth certificates, and bank cards, a puzzling set of clues. Even with the discovery of the truck and her personal items, the authorities were still no closer to finding Denise. And just a few months later, a shocking piece of information would come to light. In 1986, Denise was charged in absence with embezzlement after it was alleged that she'd stolen around $11,000 to $12,000 from the place where she worked in Manchester. The courts worked hard to gather evidence. However, the charges were subsequently dropped in 1993. This startling new revelation led investigators to believe that Denise may have run away of her own accord, and as time passed, it seemed more and more likely that she would make contact with her family. That was until 2002, when Denise Bollinger's mysterious missing person case took yet another dramatic turn. Private investigator Shirley Case discovered a woman living in Florida that shared Denise's date of birth and lived under a similar name, Denise James. This lead seemed like a stab in the dark, but authorities decided to follow up on it anyway. In May of 2002, authorities discovered that Denise Bollinger, who had disappeared in 1985, was alive and well and living in Panama City, Florida. She told investigators that her co-conspirator in the embezzlement had threatened her, causing her to go on the run. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knots, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.